We spent a while looking at MCP. I mean, let me just maybe make this more concrete before we go back to the acronyms. We built a really simple like agent builder, right, inside of YC that any employee can use to create an agent that helps them do their job. And there's like a million little places inside of our work every day where this turns out this kind of thing is really helpful, right? So like one really simple example, we just started a batch. It's the spring batch. We have a whole bunch of founders. We're just getting to know them all. They're getting to know each other. And on the first day of the kickoff, we used a little agent to help pair founders up for lunch. Right? Because it's really easy for an LLM to run through tons of little founder bios and find little interesting details that two founders have that overlap with each other, right? It's like, so you two went to the same school, and you two both, you know, rode crew, right? Like, it's that kind of thing. And you know, we work with lots of founders, and like our jobs have many, many little instances of work like that, where it just turns out that like finding little interesting connections between founders, things like that, agents are great at doing that kind of thing. And so we built a little agent builder, which is, it's agnostic to what it's being used for. If you want to build an agent, you just write a system prompt, which defines what the agent does. It's just a prompt. And then you give it access to a set of tools. And we were talking about this before the panel started. For us, we're a Rails shop. Like we have like more than a decade of internal Rails software that we built over the years to help us run our company. And a tool in this little agent builder is just a Rails function, right? And so an agent can call a Rails function to do something, to write a row to a database, or to read a row from the database, or do a bunch of other things. And it's possible that we would have used MCP, but there's no Ruby client.
Now you can go straight to A2A.
Now we can go straight to A2A.
Oh.
But you know, I don't know. We were talking about it, and it seems like the place where it could be useful for us to use MCP if we had a client for it would be to incorporate a third-party service. You know, let's say that we use GitLab. Let's say that we wanted to, you know, give agents access to GitLab repos that have YC internal software in them. Like that could be a useful thing, and if we could pull something like that out of the box, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. So I'd actually like us to share with the audience, like, what could we like come up with like a scenario where we use both protocol, and let's use like something like very trivial. Any of you want to give it a shot at coming up with an idea which would use A2A and MCP?
Yeah, I can share at least from the Rolodex of different examples, because we are working with a whole bunch of Google Cloud enterprise partners and customers. So a lot of my scenarios are enterprise focused, but that does not mean that whether it's MCP or A2A, it cannot be applied to consumer focused scenarios, right? So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. One of the simple examples is if you think about a staffing agent, maybe you'll staffing agent, like, you know, you have a job rec, or you have a position and you want to fill it. Think of a consulting company, right? So typically, this is the simplest one, right? So if you think about it in an enterprise scenario, a lot of where your projects are, who those organizations are, that might be sitting somewhere in a Salesforce CRM data, right? That's where all your blue chip, your companies are. And you want to pull that in because you're trying to fit a person's profile to a particular rec. But then it's a HR action, right? You're trying to fill in a position. So a lot of your HR data, that could be in a ServiceNow's HR module. And you're trying to bring these two together in whatever is your user interface so that your workforce can get all that insight and information and can do the right placement. So in these scenarios, if you think about it as two different systems, they might have their own agents running, which will say, hey, you give me the rec, I'll give you the top 10 where this candidate could be a fit. But I'm operating at that level, right? In the Salesforce agent, it's not really exposing what tools it is using, to your point, what API calls is it making, what database it is accessing, none of that, right? It's at the highest level of abstraction saying, this is my capability, you give me a job rec, I'll tell you what are the top 10 companies where the fit is there, right? And it publishes that capability for the client to be discovered. Similarly, in case of ServiceNow, it will give you all the data about the HR policies and XYZ, but it's giving a response to your query, not really exposing how it is working with maybe 10 other subsystems in the backend and building that response out, right? So just when you think about A2A, just think of it in terms of if every agent was an enterprise client, right, or enterprise application, then you don't really have access to the internals, but you still want to get stuff done. You want the execution to happen, and that's where you will bring in the A2A in this example. But now, each agent could be using MCP, right, to get access to APIs or tools or databases to pull in that information internally, right? So this is how both protocols come in together. The reason I shared this example is because there is active implementation. You can go take a look at GitHub for the same use case.
It's interesting. So I actually think that it's an interesting question you asked, which is like, when can two protocols to work together? I actually think I would advise folks to find the use cases first before deciding on what's the protocol. It doesn't matter if you have a workflow that just works, like whichever protocol that you use, unless that protocol really gives you a leg up in your specific use case. So I would say that I would choose, like a lot of implementations we see on the market nowadays that either use A2A or MCP out there, they don't expose this to the end users. The end users have no idea what MCP is, and they shouldn't. And they just call MCP or A2A as integrations, and I think that's what they are. So in this particular case, I actually think what MCP is particularly good at is the long tail distribution. Like, how does LLM solving a task it has never seen before? And then in this case, I think A2A could be, a server it calls, delegate a task to another agent, so on and so forth. But all of that is technical details. So work on your use cases first.
Good point. So I want to move a little bit away from the technical aspect of the protocol, and I want to speak about what is the industry doing with these tools, and more specifically startup. Pete, what have you seen in the YC space?
I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out what MCP is going to turn into, I guess. And like some of the companies in the current batch are like I spoke to a founder today. It's a company called Ost, and they're trying to build like a production-ready MCP server that basically any service could expose the same way they would expose like an API spec. And that seems to be something people are pretty excited about right now. I also see folks working on agent builders that act as clients. It seems to be like a bit of a shelling point thus far. But to be totally honest, like we were talking a little bit about this, like it's still not clear to me whether like either of these protocols needs to exist in the long term. To be totally honest, like there's, when I started, when I co-founded my YC company like 15 years ago, jQuery was all the rage. And it was basically like invented as a way to paper over some really bad browser APIs to make really simple things simple. And that like as soon as the browser APIs improved a little bit, the jQuery faded from view. And it's possible to me that that happens in this case, is like these protocols, like maybe all we need is like an open API spec, and with a few changes it'll turn out, or with like longer context windows it'll work, or maybe it'll turn out to be like yet like a layer that endures. I don't know.
Pete, we did come up with 2 million context window.
Yeah, I mean, well, there you go.
It is a long enough context window. But what I wanted to kind of touch on this point is, that essentially, whichever way you look at it, right? Like you said, whether it's the A2A or MCP, but you're expanding and extending the capability of the LLM, right, of the model in many ways. Because if you can write the Python code to do a calculation, use that as a tool as opposed to asking the model to do that. The areas, the avenues where it can be deterministic, go for the tool, right? Simplify it. The other thing which we are seeing a lot, is that it's kind of reducing the developer complexity. Because when you, again, think of a workflow, think of what a business needs to get done, even in a consumer space, like we were talking about a travel agent, right? If you wanted to put a travel, like an end-to-end travel agent together, how many different subsystems you could think of? You would need one for weather, you need one for hotel reservations, you need one to deal with an agent for, whatever you fly, say Delta, then an agent there. Suddenly, for a simple scenario, you are dealing with 5 different agents to put it together, right? When you're saying workflow automation, you want to get to a point where you're driving the last mile, right? If you're not finally completing that transaction, then you still haven't gotten to that point. But to get to that point, you have to orchestrate all these different agents. And I think at the end of the day, what these protocols are doing is that it's kind of reducing that complexity, that from a developer perspective or stitching these systems together, it has been very hard, which is one reason why, when you look at the data and the metrics, you don't see so many solutions in production deployment because it's a hard thing to orchestrate all of this together. And these systems are just making it easier. Are we 100% there? No. Will things change? Maybe everything gets replaced by an API, probably. But today, as you look at the contribution of everything which is coming from MCP and hopefully from A2A, you'll see that it's reducing the friction and it's making that orchestration step really easy, which is what we are super excited about.
I guess if I may reframe the problem, so I definitely see both of your points. On the one hand, we have something without AI, right? It's like a systematic script. It's all procedural. We can write like if-else switch statement, right? And then if we want to call, say, Twilio, we need to get an API spec. And on the other spectrum, there's this very powerful LLM. It can do anything, can reach out to Twilio to learn about how it works in a couple of seconds. It can order, DoorDash for you, things like that. It already has all the context about you, so retains all the data. So I think we're somewhere in the middle today on how the programs work with LLMs. So the LLMs today, they're not at the point where they can navigate entirety of the web. So we kind of use procedural logic protocols to supercharge it. You forgot what's the 41st tool, what that was and how to call it. Here's a template on how to call that. You forgot what's my data. Here's a RAG, here's database. I've even met people who are modeling the memory layer as a neural network too. With attention today, just limited based on the hardware, right? So until we get there to have like an all-powerful LLM, I think we'll need like a protocol layer, like a procedure layer to solve some of these shortcomings of LLMs. But I'm also optimistic on how the paradigm of the computing will change over time. And like, just to double emphasize this, like we don't use protocol for the sake of using protocol. We use protocol to make our lives easier. But if we get there with the all-powerful LLM, I think the LLM can probably solve all the API specs and figuring out, who you are and how to do tasks.
Right, so maybe connecting the two dots here where you say, why are we using this protocol? Not for fun, even though I think a lot of us in the room who are technical like to use the shiniest, latest library and framework because just it's fun, right? But at the end of the day, we are here for business. And then Miku, you said that we don't see a lot of this agent system in production. If we take a step back, what are we trying to achieve here? What are our company trying to achieve when they are using, maybe let's not speak specifically about MCP and A2A, but this agent or multi-agent system. What's the ROI? What metric should they be looking at? I think like we need to understand, to your point, like why are we using this protocol? Any of you have thought about that?
Yeah, I think you touched on it, which is essentially, I think it's high time that we start seeing the kind of ROI that there is a promise of from Gen AI perspective, right? We are somewhere in the $4.5 trillion number, but we're trying to see how do we get to that ROI. And as you start answering those questions, right, agents have evolve to be this new app equivalent, right, in the Gen AI landscape. If you think about going back to mobile, we started from the simple apps, which were flashlights, right? And then we got to a really powerful mobile app economy. And similarly, at least what we are seeing is that that's the response for Gen AI. The agents are equivalent of agent economy, which is coming up in many different ways, shape, and form. Now the question is, how do we get to the ROI? To get to the ROI, we still go back to the basics of, okay, if I'm going to invest in this particular agentic system, either for my traditional workflow or for my new workflow, what am I getting? Am I getting 30% savings in my operational efficiency? Am I thinking of new ways in which my end customers are able to interact with my product? Those are the questions that you have to answer. And then kind of think of, okay, if I am going to invest all of this because my goal is to get to 30% of operational efficiency, if I want to take it into production, I have to figure out how do I measure that. Right? Those are the harder challenges than thinking of the tools or the protocols to orchestrate. How are you going to measure that your models are working, the outputs from the model are in the category that is acceptable to you as a business? And then is it giving you the ROI in terms of dollar savings, right? So a lot of things when we think about, from early exploration to production, it's not about agents, it's not about models, pick any of it, but it has been a hard journey because we are not starting from the use case or the business first. If we start from the tool first, then most probably, it will take us a lot of time to get to that metric, to get to that measurement. And the other thing is all the tooling that has to happen for things to get into production. Just take any Gen AI application. You have to start thinking of model evaluation. You have to start thinking of observability. You have to start thinking of monitoring. I mean, I don't have those many conversations even today about how many nines do I get from my Gen AI workload, right? I don't have those conversations. What is the SLA on my Gen AI solution? Those are the questions which will take us from these explorations to production deployment. We are getting there, but it's still, I would say, early phase if you take the average of what is needed to get into scale deployments.
Measuring all of this is hard. Actually, I was at SRECon a few weeks ago, and someone from Asia was speaking about some feature in Asia, and the way they were monitoring the quality of the tool was using NPS, which I don't know if you guys know this metric, but it's very far away from the technical tools. So I think you can only improve what you can measure, and you can understand if something is worth it if you can measure it. But if you can't, it's a black box. Pete, can you tell us a little bit about what's the the investment thesis or what you guys are looking at when it comes to agent at YC?
The investment thesis?
Yeah, or like what's what are you looking at? Like maybe like what's our vision here? Do you have like a specific?
I feel like I can answer that in two ways, and I'm not quite sure which one is better. On one level, I just personally think that we're at one of the most interesting moments in human history. I mean, I'm dead honest about that. Like I think AI is going to change a lot about how all of us do our jobs and a lot about our lives. And that some of it's absolutely amazing and some of it's like kind of scary to think about. But there are a lot of changes that are going to happen, and a lot of tools are going to be built that are incredibly powerful. And software is going to play a much, much bigger role in all of our lives. And so like that's like an investment thesis, I guess you could say. It's just that like you should be investing right now. Like it's that simple. But then like on the other hand, like how do I actually do my job on a day-to-day basis? Like we look for really smart founders, right. and we invest really early. And in most cases, we try not to pay too much attention to the idea. We try to pay attention to the founders because a lot of founders will change their idea and the idea evolves. And like, honestly, it's just really hard to make good predictions right now, right? Like, I don't know, I tweeted about this the other day. It's like the idea of like trying to put together like a TAM estimate it's almost silly, right? There's a whole bunch of, I think, long held, like received wisdom about like this kind of thing is a good investment and this is a bad investment, that it's just not obvious to me that those things are going to be true even in a couple of years from now. So.
It's interesting, as it never occurred to me to measure ROI of tools in my day job as an investor, just because I'm a part-time cartoonist too, so I try a lot about like AI creativity tools, like image generation models, video generation models. Most of the time, my reaction in using AI is that, oh, I didn't know I needed this, and now I can't live without it. And that ROI was just never a question in my mind. Like, AI companion, which I don't actively invest in, is like a very big category. And then no one who has used the AI companion will be like, what's the ROI of using character AI or something like that? So I actually think the market is just growing so much bigger because there are so many ways in which we're using tools we didn't know we need. And then because of that, there's just so much 10x workflows out there that we can now use that didn't exist before.
Very cool. All right, the last question for tonight, and then we are going to open it for Q&A. One of the themes of tonight is reliability. Okay, so I wanted to touch base a little bit about that. Maybe first, any of you have thought about the reliability of this tool? Where are we sitting here? Are they production ready? Or are we still early and it's more for POC?
Yeah, reliability is like I touched on some of those points before, but it's a collection of a lot of things, right? Like I said, first thing is can we actually serve the Gen AI workloads in production reliably? But for that to happen, you need to know what does your Gen AI workload in production look like. And it might sound simple, but think about it that as an ecosystem, we haven't really taken those many Gen AI applications into production. So businesses do not have that kind of a very simple, straightforward ROI calculator saying, I know that I'll have these many million transactions at scale, so I'm going to plan for it, right? So we are just kind of starting on that journey. And then the other aspect of reliability is to, where we will see more investment, maybe, you're already seeing those startups, but more investment in how do you monitor and how do you kind of trace? Because think about it, when we talk a little bit about agent to agent. Now, when we interact with the agentic system, we give it a prompt and we have a back and forth, right? We say, this is not what I expected, or I want you to do this, or I want you to do that. And we are having that conversation, that interaction between us as a human and an agent. But when you talk about agents working together, you're going to have agents doing those prompts. You're not there in that equation. It's two agents communicating. You don't know what that exchange format is, but you still need to know that it's somehow fitting in the guardrails of your enterprise policies and governance, right? So think about it, more opaque the systems become, which it will be as you raise the level at which the interaction is happening, there would be more need for these tools to measure, to evaluate, to bring it back to your enterprise guidelines so that you can have the confidence that you can let it run in production deployment, right? You can let it run where you are confident that it's not doing something which will impact your brand as a business. And that we have miles to go before we get to that comfort level for these systems, right? So reliability, I think a lot is happening. I see a lot of contributions in terms of observability, in terms of monitoring, in terms of tracing. But we are just starting like 2 weeks back where we are saying, hey, your agent can be opaque. And now you have to rethink what does it mean to measure the outcomes in this context, right?
We're good. All right. Let's open it up for question.
Raise your hand and say your name and where you work for, actually. So if you have any questions.
The first one is always the hardest.
The first one is the hardest one.
Hi, this is Jordi from FuseStats. We work on payments for AI agents. And I have a question for startup versus enterprise. Like, I have never seen big companies and VCs trying to front-run consumers that much in a lot of stuff. For example, in payments. What do you think that it's the paper of startups when, you know, like until now the play could be like mobile appears and you're like, oh, I'm Adobe for mobile. But now it looks like Adobe for AI is going to be Adobe. Walmart for the internet, like for AI, is going to be Walmart. So how do you see the paper of new startups? Like something changed there, or it has always been this way where, you know, like big corporations are really, really at the frontier of deploying new technology?
I had a little bit of trouble understanding some of that. Are you asking whether I think startups or big companies are going to end up dominating?
Yeah, like this like paradigm shift of we have Gen AI now. So, you know, like usually when there's a paradigm shift, startups usually dominate. But now it's the first time that I'm seeing all the big companies saying, like, no, we want that. Like, let's bring it here.
Yeah. I'm pretty bullish on startups right now.
Well,
I know, it's my job to say that. Look, I guess it's pretty hard to make predictions, and there have been a few moments where, to be totally honest, I just counted Google out entirely, and then like, man, like their models are amazing, you know, and so like,
Thank you.
Cheers, cheers. They're incredible. Like Gemini is amazing. But like, you know, I don't know. There are a few things that make me feel like this is a really unique moment for startups. Like one, I just think that a lot of applications, if you build them from the ground up with AI, are going to look really different from the version of whatever it is that we've been using for decades. And that creates an opportunity for a startup that like doesn't have to deal with like a super legacy tech stack with tons of tech debt. And, you know, and so I just think that like a lot of ideas are good right now because they can be rebuilt and reimagined in a totally new way, right? And so like that makes me excited about startups. I also think that companies that start and run themselves with a lot of AI are probably going to look really different from bigger companies that weren't run that way. And so like they have like a legacy people stack in a way, which is, it's weird to talk about that. But my guess is that like, well, we're already seeing this. There's a lot of really small companies, tiny startups that are like growing shockingly fast with very small teams. And, you know, in a landscape with a lot of small companies that are operating incredibly leanly and incredibly efficiently, competing with lots of bigger companies that aren't able to operate that way, startups have a real big advantage.
I love that, and I completely agree. And, you know, it's really fascinating what he said, because you can think of so many legacy applications, right? And then think about a scenario where all you would have is a search bar, and you're still going to get to that same outcome, right? So if all those steps that we typically do, right, whether you're booking your flight or whatever, just imagine all of them could go away because you have a very powerful foundation model underneath, and you just have a single conversation interface to get your job done, right? So there's so many workflows to be imagined. For example, you know, I was working with a manufacturing company, and they have probably world's most legacy-heavy workflows and scenarios at the factory. But 30 to 40% of that, as we speak, is getting automated by bringing AI into the equation, from, you know, summarizing the document to review the spec to step A, step B, step C. So now you used to have 10 steps to get to a grading report. Now you have 3 steps. Right? So those are the kind of, you know, you don't have to think of something completely out of the box. All these legacy systems are there. They just need to be reimagined in how they can be worked out differently. It's a massive opportunity.
Yeah,
Put your hands up.
Yeah, I'm bullish on startups for the reason of, have you read this book called Innovator's Dilemma? So it's something that all big companies kind of suffer from, because you end up shipping your org chart. And then when we look at the AI wave, I actually don't agree that, you know, Adobe of the AI is Adobe, because we are seeing so many interesting, like, other exciting things. At the same time, we're already seeing startups making it to the ranks. Like OpenAI, it didn't come out like that many years ago, and Anthropic too, because these are relatively small compared to incumbents still. If we were to believe that big companies will always, ship the best things in the AI age, like, I'm sorry, GitHub, but GitHub Copilot would have been, it would have won, but instead we have Cursor. It's just a reality of things. That's why I'm just extremely bullish on betting founders who didn't have the baggage of, the org chart, the legacy software. Instead, they just go full force using the models to make amazing things.
If you have questions, put your hands up, please.
I'll just talk my book one a little bit more, which is that for those of you in this room who are working for really big companies that are operating slowly, you should quit your jobs and go start a startup.
I'm in a wrong panel. But I
That was for you too.
I know.
You should apply to YC.
I do want to share that. Okay, so I started my startup in AI, in predictive AI, in 2014, when AI was not a thing. I ran it for 10 years. I aged 500 years. But there was absolutely not even 1% of the tools, of the systems that you have today, right? So what took me 4 years to commercialize, you can get to that in 4 months, right? And this is hard-earned, this is like really learning from the scratches and the pains. So one real advice is, just start putting these things together, because that part has become really easy. Now, truly, it's about the idea, because all the tooling that you need to get to that, you don't need to build a team of 100 people to get to your first POC or your first MVP, right? That's one point. The other point is when it comes to AI, it doesn't matter how big a company is, they are all startups, right? Because we are all trying to figure out, how do you keep the momentum? How do you get to that next level of innovation, next level of iteration? So, it truly is fascinating times, big or small. But I think, to try to get to now the question where it is different for a startup versus a bigger company is that how do you really translate that into meaningful returns, right? That's where we are at, where the thinking might be slightly different, but otherwise it's innovation every day, and every day is a new day. Right?
Hi, I'm Kevin. Great panel, thanks everyone. And props to Google, Gemini is really great. We know, nobody saw that coming. I wanted to ask a question about design and interface. I think Wolfram said a while back that LLMs haven't had their GUI moment, like the Xerox PARC. Steve Jobs runs in and finds the GUI, and now all of us interact that way. Do you think search bar is the Louis of the future? Is there in putting that aside, what have you seen that's really interesting in terms of interface with LLMs? If you could share your favorites, that'd be really cool.
I think one net new interface I've always seen and honestly surprised me is more generative interfaces. I actually wrote about this, if you search for generative AI, is that people start to use LLMs to change their components based on the traffic and then what the traffic characteristics are, which is a very powerful thing when you think about it. In the 90s, we had static HTML, and then we had less static things. Now we have server actions, which is all procedural. But now people are starting to code up components on the UI that LLMs can control and decide what to present it with. So OpenAI released a very cool image model, and I tried it out. It can actually re-render all of the interface in a different style instantly. So I've been waiting for someone to hack on this for a long time. If no one's hacking on this, I'm hacking on this weekend, which is given a generated interface, actually transform the DOM into something that looks like that using the generated assets. There are just so much possibilities. Yeah.
I don't know if I haven't read that piece by Wolfram yet, but I don't know if I agree with him in that I actually think chat is going to be an enduring interface. LLMs are just little smart models you can talk to, and everybody knows how to talk. Everybody knows how to write. And so I actually think that I have seen a lot of cases where developers build applications that add a whole bunch of like additional layers of abstraction on top of just the text. And I think in many cases it makes it worse. It constrains the model. Some of the neat things that I've seen are what amount to like agent builders, where you're giving the user you're essentially giving the user a way to write a system prompt that is then used over and over again to solve problems. But you're doing that by chatting with them, right? And you're sort of, it's like the agent and the user chat with each other to try to figure out how to solve a problem. And then once the problem is solved, you can take the chat and you can have another agent then compress that down into a system prompt, which is basically a recipe for solving that problem in a repeatable way, which I think is really neat.
Nothing is more fascinating than vibe coding.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, I don't know, I just can't have enough of it. I don't even have ideas, but just to do that, I do things. It's that crazy. And then to your point, you have now a voice control way in which you do things. So I'm like, okay, A2A has been launched. Give me the starter template for this particular scenario, and I get 80%, I'm not kidding, at least in my simple scenarios, 80% of that comes back correct in the first conversation, right? So I don't know what that means, but I don't feel anything else has fascinated me so much. Well, one more thing which fascinated me is, I love images, which is why I did the startup, because we were taking pictures of almonds and doing USDA grading on that. When you feed it into any kind of image generation model, what we are calling it is visual reasoning. So far, all of what we have been exposed to is text. But now you give it the image, you give it the video, and you say, find me the defects in this image. And it does give me the defects, which took me 4 years, going back to my same point, to commercialize. It gives me that without any kind of pre-training on that image and tells me you have 30 good berries and 40 bad berries in that one image. I'm not doing the bounding boxes. I'm not doing the draining. I'm not doing annotation. I am doing absolutely nothing, right? So that's the power. I'm truly fascinated about visual reasoning, because I don't think we have scratched the surface on how many different use cases and scenarios it can open up. One of my favorite is, I love Bollywood movies. So I used to advise a startup where if you have the entire movie, you can extract the frame of the lead actor in different poses, and then you stitch it together for kind of a small preview or whatever. You used to pay the copywriters and the editors for 15, 20 hours to do that. Apply visual reasoning to it, you get that in less than 5 minutes, right? So my short answer is just explore VO, imagine all the other models out there, and multimodality and all these different formats of inputs. There are so many use cases out there which are not explored yet.
We have one question on this side.
Hi, it's a question for Peter and Yoko. I'm Eugene. We're with Basin AI. We stopped CodeGen from hallucinating. My question is more towards the investment side of things. So YC's bread and butter has been B2B SaaS lately, and I think a16z as well, Speedrun has gone from consumer to like more towards B2B. Now with all these tools, MCP, like specific MCP service, agentic behaviors, do you see that shifting towards being more like, hey, we build an MCP server and we're charging on a subscription model to that? Like the example you did with the co-founder pairing at dinner. Do you see the shift in investment going away from pure B2B SaaS?
Do I see the investment moving away from just B2B SaaS
into more agentic systems? Yeah.
Into smart agentic systems? Yeah, I mean, maybe the way to say it is I think smart agentic systems are going to be super useful for people in their jobs and people in their personal lives, and that we'll see a lot of investment in both.
Yeah, we actually invest in across very different verticals, very different stages. So we invest up and down the stack, from foundational models to AI-driven systems to B2B SaaS to traditional infrastructure like databases of the world. So we always adjust our thesis based on what is working and what is coming up in the market. So it's not a static thing. At the same time, I don't think any VC can tell you they can predict the future. No one can predict the market. So at the same time, we're just staying very close to what is happening, what is working. And as a developer, honestly, it's an honor to invest in things that I use day to day. So very hands-on with the tools.
Am I good? Miku, you mentioned like it seems that Google's vision is to be the search bar is kind of the interface for everything to happen. Like these agentic things will happen, like book me a flight and it'll just automatically do that. Yoko, you mentioned the innovator's dilemma as to why startups are going to win. Miku, if you just give an agent a task and it does something for you, it kind of cannibalizes Google Ads because it's not going to show you recommendations. How are you guys thinking about that?
Well, we have thoughts. I'm not sharing it. But see, the thing is that we are embracing a lot of internally in Google. It's embracing all the capabilities that are coming from LLMs and foundation model. And in fact, Google is at the forefront of contributing to that. We even contributed the open source foundation models through Gemma, right? So, kind of to go back to Google's paradigm, we know and we are actively kind of absorbing the fact that search is going to change. Right, and you start seeing some of those in the products that we announce, in the releases that we are making. So I think we are on top of it, and we are at the forefront. And that vision, which I shared in terms of like just having a single search bar, that was more from kind of my own vision of where I see things, because I do see it in my daily interactions with customers, end customers, that the whole concept of workflow is changing very quickly because it doesn't make sense in the current construct of what we are seeing, right? So you'll start seeing the changes in search. You'll start seeing all the contributions from Imagen and VO. We just released a model on robotics a few weeks back. I know we have someone from DeepMind. So we are actively participating in the phase of innovation, right? That's the best answer I could give to that question.
We only have one more question, but feel free to connect afterwards. So.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Kaushik. I'm building Wildcard. Currently, we are helping, we're building evaluation and observability for agentic protocols like MCP and A2A. So if you're building an MCP server, please come find me. My question is, we talked a lot about workflows and autonomous agentic systems. It seems like today most of the business value is driven from these workflows. Is there something that needs to change either in society or like something technically, like what is kind of the change we need to see to graduate from workflows into more autonomous agentic systems?
I think systems need to reliably work in production for that transition to happen, right? So we are kind of on that journey, but if you said, are we already there? We are not, right? Which was some of the examples that I shared. And I think what you shared, what you're building from observability perspective, those are the two links that we need to get it to that state, right? That confidence that I can run it, I can take it, I can expose it to my, 1 million customer base for scenarios like whether it's customer support or whether it's, live marketing campaign and all of that. That trust has to come when you start seeing these systems run reliably. Let me put it this way. Agentic AI workflows or scenarios, when they become boring enough, right? Where right now it's very interesting. Every single time you take something on that path, you are thinking of 100 different things. You are instrumenting, you are measuring, you are evaluating. When it gets to the point where that kind of stability is there, where you at least understand the system well enough. It's not that it needs to be perfect, but you understand well enough in how many ways it works or in how many ways it might not work so that you can put the guardrails towards that. When you start seeing that, then you'll start seeing many more agentic or autonomous, in production deployment.
I think my answer will be the foundational model advancement. The reason we need workflow, like with checkpoints, observability, is that we need to make sure that there are systematic checks. The model is doing the right things. Like if for anyone who has used computer use agents, right? Like the computer use agents today just does not scrape the web very reliably or navigate the web very reliably. Another example is, so when OpenAI's image model came out, I definitely found that I replaced some of the image-based workflows I used to do on my gaming computer. So things like identity transfer, like upload the picture and ask it to generate a manga of that, image. Instead of like a 5-step workflow, you can now just use one-shot prompt and have in-context learning.
Yeah, I feel like this question sort of hinges on the definition of autonomous, where this is like one of these goalpost moving things. Honestly, I actually think that like we're already there for a reasonable definition of autonomous, in the sense that you can build an agent with a system prompt that just has a description of a task that needs to get done and a set of steps to do it and a bunch of caveats and other things to consider. And as long as that agent has access to reliable tools, it will perform with high reliability on its own. And that, like, especially with the latest, like 2.5, it's incredible. These reasoning models are just so impressive. And so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's a controversial answer or a boring answer, but I actually think we're there. Like, I think the things that haven't caught up to the state of the models are people's ability to write good prompts and software for building these agents and running them in productive environments. That's my thesis.
All right, please give a big round of applause for our panelists.